Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's Tuesday, and that means it's time for another one of our isms, and today I'd like to speak with you about unionism. Unionism. Now, given the scope and the breadth of the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, you might be tempted to assume that unionism is going to have something to do with the doctrine of the Trinity, the triune God, but this is actually an ism having more to do with the economic realm rather than the issues related to the Trinity. Unionism is the belief in the virtues and values of trade unions in the economy. And I want to explain a little bit about what can be perfectly appropriate about unionism and what can be perfectly inappropriate about unionism. And the difference, not surprisingly, is going to be found here. That unionism, which is voluntary, is a healthy thing, and that unionism, which is involuntary, is an unhealthy thing. Unionism is this idea that we're going to band together and we're going to agree together to place particular conditions upon our willingness to work for a particular company or to do a particular kind of job. So the Steel Workers Union was a union of people who worked in steel mills who said, we're going to agree that none of us are going to work in any of the steel mills unless they pay us X number of dollars an hour, unless they ensure us this level of safety in the workplace, unless they do this or do that. This collective bargaining, and there's not a thing in the world wrong with that. However, I should point out that there's also not a thing in the world wrong with a group of steel companies coming together saying amongst themselves, you know what, we're going to agree that we're not going to hire anybody unless they work for this little. As long as it's all voluntary, it's all fine, though it's not probably going to get very far. In either instance, that is, when people collectively decide we're not going to work for the steel mill unless they pay us this much, that only works long enough for someone else to show up and say, well, I'll work for that much, and to get the job. And when the owners of the mills agree we're not going to pay any more than X for labor in our factories, that works well and good until one of the owners says, well, I'm willing to pay that much, and then the whole thing blows up. In short, these voluntary arrangements very quickly grow victim of the reality of supply and demand. So how do you maintain the value of collective bargaining against the reality of supply and demand? Well, that's when it slides into the use of force. I've got nothing wrong, against any group of people saying we're not going to work unless X. My beef is when they say no one else may work for X or less than X. The problem is not the National Football League the players deciding we're not going to play unless we agree to profit sharing. The problem is when they say, if you want to play football and you try to play football while we're doing this, we're going to harm you. If you want to cross this picket line, we're going to do violence to you. That's the problem. And the same thing is true in what we would call collusion, though it's really nothing different when the owners make the same agreement. As I'm speaking to you right now, we're in a lockout situation in Major League Baseball where the owners are saying we're not going to proceed with the activities of the oncoming season until we reach an agreement with the players. None of the teams are going to hire unless or until this happens or that happens. And so there's nothing going on in baseball right now. Again, nothing wrong with that. The problem would come if, again, the Major League Baseball players decided to start their own league apart from the owners, and the owners all decided that anybody who decides to play for this league needs to be met in a dark alley and beaten up. Which should remind you of something. The enemy of the laborer in a business, in a factory or any other kind of situation is not ownership. It's not management. It's the competitor. It's the person willing to do the job and compete for the job and either do better or be willing to work for less. That's always the case. You know, for the last few years, I've served as a professor, an adjunct professor at Ivy Tech Community College teaching philosophy. And the reality is, I was literally making less money than my students. And I would talk to them about this. I'd say, why do you think that is? Well, because there are enough people out there who are willing to do this job for this little amount of money that the job gets done. I can get angry about it, but it doesn't make any sense. I can feel put out, but it doesn't make any sense. There are enough people who want this job and are willing to accept it at this pay level that if I want to accept the job, then I'm going to have to accept it at that pay level. Unions, understood as voluntary associations, are, what's the word for it? Harmless and ineffective. Unions supported by violence or threats of violence can be, in the short term, effective in one sense, but only effective over the protestations of others who are wanting to agree to work. It only makes sense if you begin with the assumption that you're owed a certain wage, you're due this certain amount of money, and someone's cheating you. It grows out of flawed economics. I do want you to take this home with you. I want you to understand, maybe the important lesson that maybe you haven't thought of is this, that whatever group agrees to limit what they're willing to do, it's all a union. It doesn't matter whether it's owner or whether it's labor. It doesn't matter whether it's OPEC or whether it's the United Oil Workers Association. It's all the same thing. I hope that helps. We live in an age of uncertainty. We're ignorant of our past and fearful of our future. And in the here and now, well, we just don't know. The one thing we're sure of is that we're not sure at all. That is a part of the folly of postmodernism. This epistemology of the culture is immediately, obviously, and devastatingly self-referentially absurd. It affirms the truth that there is no truth. It says you are false if you affirm there is a false. But the contradictions do not stop there. It's not only epistemological nonsense, it is also moral nonsense. As postmodernism crept into our culture, it came through the thoughts and works of a ragtag band of mourning Jeremiahs. Sartre wept over the death of truth, as did his compatriot Camus. Kierkegaard may have been the melancholy Dane, but Nietzsche was not a man you wanted to invite to a party. This was no giddy celebration of emancipation, but the doleful realization that we are but strangers in a hostilely indifferent universe. It's ironic that the younger generation, those who find the lightness of being rather bearable, in some ways are more consistent than their fathers. Consider, why would one mourn to discover that there is no truth? One cannot mourn unless one presupposes that it is true that truth has value. If nothing is true, it's not true that truth has value, and so nothing is lost. And so there should be no mourning. Perhaps they've learned the lesson, though we cannot either say that it is true, that it is false, to think it's sad that there is no true, if there is no true. The younger generation, however, has its own version of the same inconsistency. They not only mourn the loss of truth, they attack as evil those few of us left who affirm that there is truth. One of the supposed great advantages of relativism is what it can do for peace. If Roman Catholicism can be true for you and Protestantism true for me, but neither can be really true, then why all the fighting in Northern Ireland? If Judaism has no claim on the Muslim and Islam on the Jew, we need no more summits at Camp David. The problem is solved. If we just agree to disagree, or agree to agree that it is true neither of what we hold is true, then peace descends like the dew. We don't agree. We affirm that Jesus is Lord over those who in his grace recognize it and those who do not. We affirm that there is true truth and that relativism is a lie. And so we are attacked. War breaks out every time your reality clashes with mine. To me, it's fine for me to take what you own. To you, perhaps not. And so the shooting starts. But so far, and believe me, this is changing, we are merely attacked socially. That is, we're called names, and tops on the list is arrogant. This is what we're called. Whoever the we is that affirms objective, knowable reality. Who do you think you are? Do you think that you have a corner on the truth? Who are you to say what's true and what's false? Where is your humility? You always think you're right. The pimps of tolerance won't tolerate us walking on their street corner. It's bad for business. And sadly, we are just relativist enough that we let this nonsense get to us. We bend and scrape and plead and make sure we let everyone know that some of our best friends are relativists. We miss the hypocrisy of their judgment. We miss out on the opportunity to respond. Are you saying it is objectively true that I should never say something is objectively true? Are you saying it is wrong for me to say anything is wrong? But we also miss the most astounding hypocrisy of all, that they think they have mastered humility and that we have the arrogance problem. Ask them this, which is more arrogant? I say that there's an objective reality outside of myself. I did not make it. I do not control it. I cannot comprehend it in its totality, but I can, and you can, know something about it that is real and true. Or is this more arrogant? I create reality. Whatever is because I believe it to be so. Neither you nor some God nor anyone else can change the reality that I have constructed in my own head. To me, sodomy is fine, and as such, it can never be judged. Relativism is not rooted, friends, in epistemological humility, but in the very ontological pride with which the serpent tempted Eve. Bite into relativism, and you shall be as God, creating reality, morality, all that is. Our view, in turn, turns on the conviction that the God who made us made all things, and that he has revealed some things to us such that we can know them. We are the subjects of reality, not its master. Relativism is not humility. It is instead humiliating. It is the non-system of nonsense that falls of its own weight before it can take a step. All the moral posturing is just that, the faux posture of those slouching toward Gehenna. We are indeed called to be humble, to recognize that there but for the grace of God go all of us. But we must never be humble about God and about His revelation of Himself. We must never confuse our own wishes with His. He is what He is. That's His name. And we are His creatures who must believe and affirm all that He teaches. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.